A woman sold by her own father for the price of a debt. An Apache widower who bought her for reasons no one understood. This is the story of how two outcasts, thrown together by cruelty, found a family in a world that tried to tear them apart. A world of secrets, lies, and a darkness buried just beneath the dust of the Arizona territory. If you enjoy stories of survival and justice, make sure you like this video and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. Now, let's ride into the town of Stillwater. The spring wind carried more grit than scent that morning. It ground through the narrow streets of Stillwater like sand through a millstone. It was the kind of air that dried sweat before it touched your skin and left a layer of dust on your tongue. By mid-morning, the town had gathered in the square, drawn the way flies swarm a carcass. There was no festival, no preacher's sermon, just the promise of a spectacle, and Lucy Hart was the main event. She stood in the center of it all, her shoulders squared, though her stomach was a knot of snakes. Her hands weren't bound by rope, but by the iron grip of her father's arm. She was 25 that spring, old enough to know how fast a life could unravel. Her faded calico dress hung loose, the seams worn shiny from too much scrubbing. Her hair, a plain light brown, was whipped by the restless wind. Her father, Thomas Hart, cleared his throat. He was a man who believed debt gave him power over other people's lives. "Strong enough to keep a house," he announced to the crowd. "Quiet enough to mind her tongue. She don't complain much. She'll do for someone." Laughter skittered through the men, sharp and low. The women just pressed their lips into thin, hard lines. Lucy fixed her eyes on a hitching post at the far edge of the square. She stared at it, trying to make the world disappear. She knew the whispers, barren, useless, a mouth to feed and nothing to show for it. "Price is fair," Thomas added, spitting into the dust. "What's owed on my books is cleared with her gone." Lucy flinched at the word. Gone. She hadn't been asked. She'd been handed over, like a sack of bad flour. Her jaw clenched so tight it ached, but her eyes stayed dry. She had learned long ago that tears were a currency she couldn't afford to spend. From the edge of the crowd, a figure moved. He was taller than most, shoulders wide. His black hair was bound loosely at his neck. The brim of his hat shadowed his face, but his skin carried the bronze of the desert sun. He was Apache. A hush fell over the square, the way it always did. Some men spat. Others stiffened, their hands drifting toward their belts. He didn't look at any of them. He walked straight to the rough table where Thomas Hart stood. Without a word, he drew a small pouch of coins from his coat and set it down. The dull clink of metal on wood cut through the silence. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You sure, Lone Elk? She's no bargain, and there's no return." The Apache, Will Lone Elk, didn't look at Thomas. He didn't look at Lucy. His gaze was fixed somewhere on the far horizon. "Paid," he said. The single word was low and firm, like a current running deep beneath still water. Thomas shrugged, swept the coins into his palm, and released Lucy's arm. "She's yours, then." For a single, wild heartbeat, Lucy thought of running, bolting down the street until the desert swallowed her whole. But her legs wouldn't obey. Instead, they carried her to the small satchel she had packed in secret. A spare dress, a cracked comb, her mother's worn Bible. She slipped the strap over her shoulder and turned to face the man who had bought her. The crowd parted. No one spoke, but their silence screamed. A fallen woman, an Apache savage, two kinds of disgrace bound together. Lucy felt the shame burn hotter than the sun, but beneath it, something else flickered. A strange, final peace. Whatever came next couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. Will didn't offer a hand. He just stepped aside, and she followed him. At the edge of town, a rough-built freight wagon waited, hitched to two dusty mules. He climbed onto the seat. He gave her the barest nod. She hauled herself up beside him. For a moment, they just sat there. Two strangers tied together by a transaction neither of them had wanted. He passed her a dented canteen. Water. She drank. It tasted of iron and old leather, but it cooled the dust in her throat. "Thank you," she murmured. He didn't answer. He just clucked the mules into motion. The wagon rolled out of Stillwater. Lucy kept her eyes forward, refusing to look back. The land stretched out, bare and brutal. They traveled for an hour without speaking. Finally, Lucy couldn't stand it. "Why?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. Will didn't look at her. "Children," he said. She blinked. "Children?" "Two," he continued, his eyes steady on the trail. "Need someone there when I'm in the fields. Someone who won't harm them." Lucy's throat tightened. Not a wife, not a partner, a caretaker, a hired hand paid for with a handful of coins. "And you think I'll stay?" she asked, a bitter edge to her voice. Will's jaw moved once, as if he were chewing on the words. "You're here," he said. "That's enough for now." She had been called many things in her life: daughter, wife, barren, burden. She had never, ever been called enough. As dusk drew near, the road narrowed. The silence between them felt heavier than the miles they had traveled. But as Lucy risked a glance at the man beside her, she saw something that made her blood run cold. He wasn't just watching the trail. His eyes were scanning the ridgelines, not like a man looking for landmarks, like a man looking for an ambush. He hadn't just bought a caretaker, he had bought a shield, and she was sitting right beside him. The wagon rattled into a valley just as the last of the sun bled from the sky. An adobe house stood against a low ridge, a leaning corral beside it. It wasn't pretty, but it was standing. That was more than Lucy could say for herself. Will climbed down and gestured toward the door. Two small faces appeared in the opening. A girl, maybe 9, with dark, watchful eyes and hair in a tight braid. A little boy, no more than 5, clutching her dress, his thumb in his mouth. "Sophia. Ben," Will said. "This is Lucy." The girl's chin tilted up, sharp with suspicion. The boy hid behind her skirt. The silence was a wall. Supper was beans and stale bread. Sophia served her father, then her brother, then herself. She didn't prepare a bowl for Lucy. The message was clear. "You are not one of us." "Give her a bowl," Will said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a stone. Sophia obeyed, her movements stiff with resentment. She slammed the bowl down in front of Lucy. The beans tasted scorched, but Lucy ate every bite. To be fed was to be counted. That night, Lucy climbed a ladder to the loft where the children slept. 2 small pallets of blankets lay side by side. Sophia pretended to sleep, but Lucy could feel the girl's eyes on her in the dark. She spread her own thin blanket on the bare floorboards and lay down, staring into the darkness. She had traded one prison for another. The next morning, the smell of burnt bread filled the cabin. Lucy had tried to make herself useful and failed. Sophia stood over her, a small, smug look on her face. "You'll burn the house down if you try again." Lucy bit back the angry retort. "Then show me," she said, her voice tight. And so began her real trial. It wasn't just about cooking or cleaning. It was about earning her place, inch by painful inch. She learned to haul water without spilling it, to mend clothes with a steady hand, to soothe Ben's nightmares without waking his sister. Will watched her. He said little. A nod here, a quiet good there. His approval was a rare and precious currency. But the children, especially Sophia, were a fortress of distrust. One afternoon, Will took them out to gather plants. He showed Lucy a spiny bush with pale, delicate blossoms. "Good for fever," he said. Lucy reached for one clumsily, and a thorn sliced her palm open. Blood welled, bright against her skin. Sophia snorted. "Told you." Will took her hand. He cleaned the wound with whiskey from a small flask, his touch efficient, impersonal. He wrapped it in a strip of cloth. "Go under the thorns," he said. "Not over." That night, a whimper from the loft woke Lucy. Sophia was burning with fever. Lucy spent the night by her side, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, humming an old hymn her mother used to sing. She didn't know if the blossoms would work. She didn't know if she was doing it right. She just knew she couldn't let this little girl feel as alone as she had. By dawn, the fever had broken. Sophia opened her eyes and looked at Lucy, her gaze no longer sharp, but searching. "You stayed," she whispered. "Of course," Lucy said. Sophia swallowed. "You're not useless." The words, spoken in a grudging whisper, struck Lucy harder than any insult ever had. She bent and pressed a kiss to the child's forehead. "Neither are you." She thought it was a turning point, a beginning. But when she went into town for supplies a week later, her old life came roaring back. Her ex-husband, Eli, stood in the square, his face mean and twisted. "I heard you fetched up in the dirt with savages," he sneered. "Maybe that's all you're fit for." The town watched, their eyes hungry for her shame. And then Will was there. He hadn't come with them. He'd followed. He stepped between Lucy and Eli, a silent, immovable wall. "Her name is Lucy," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That's all you need to remember." Eli backed down. The town looked away, but as they rode out of Stillwater, Lucy realized the truth. Will hadn't followed her to protect her. He had followed her because Eli was there. He had known Eli would be there. He wasn't just a widower. He wasn't just a father. He was a man hunting for something, and her past was somehow tied to his. The wagon ride back to the cabin was a silent battle of wills. Lucy's mind was a storm. Will had defended her. He had stood up to the whole town for her. But it wasn't for her. It was for something else. Some secret that connected him to her cruel ex-husband. When they got back, the silence in the cabin was suffocating. "What is your business with Eli Cobb?" she finally demanded. Will was cleaning his rifle, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look at her. "He's a bad man." "There are a lot of bad men in this world," she shot back. "Why him?" He finally looked up, and his eyes were full of a cold, ancient grief. "Because his family is the reason my wife is dead." The words hit her like a physical blow. She sank into a chair. What happened?" "It wasn't a sickness that took her," he said, his voice flat and hard. "It was a raid. White men looking for Apache scalps to sell for bounty. The Cobbs were the ones who paid for them." He looked down at the rifle in his hands. "I was away, trading. When I got back, the village was gone. Smoke and ash. They took my wife. They took my son." "Ben?" Lucy whispered, her heart breaking for him. "No," he said, and his voice cracked. "My first son. He was only 3. He told her the story then. A story of unimaginable loss. How he had tracked the raiders for months. How he had found his wife's body, and the bodies of so many others. He had found Ben and Sophia hiding in a cave, 2 small, terrified children who had lost their mother and their older sister. Sophia's mother was my wife's sister," he explained. "I took them as my own." Lucy stared at him, at this man who had carried so much pain in silence. He wasn't just a widower. He was a survivor of a massacre. "So, you came here? For revenge?" "I came here for justice," he corrected her. "The law won't touch a man like Eli Cobb, so I have to." Now she understood. He hadn't bought her to be a caretaker. He hadn't bought her to be a shield. He had bought her because she was Lucy Hart, Eli Cobb's former wife. She was his way in, his connection to the man who had destroyed his world. "What did you think I could do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I didn't know," he admitted. "I just knew I had to be close." A cold dread settled in her stomach. She wasn't a partner in his quest for justice. She was a tool, a pawn in a deadly game. That night, as she lay in the loft, she heard a sound outside. Not the wind, not an animal. It was the soft crunch of a boot on gravel. Then another. Someone was out there, watching the cabin. She crept to the small loft window and peered out. In the faint moonlight, she saw two figures standing at the edge of the trees. It was Eli and his mother, Marjorie. They were staring at the cabin, their faces pale and cruel in the moonlight. They weren't just watching, they were waiting. And Lucy knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she had brought the danger right to Will's door. Lucy didn't sleep. She sat in the darkness of the loft, watching the two figures at the edge of the woods. They didn't move for hours. Just stood there, a silent, menacing promise. Before dawn, they were gone. She didn't tell Will. What could she say? That her past was a hungry ghost that had followed her here? He already knew that. A new, unspoken tension filled the cabin. They were no longer just a man and two children, and the woman he'd taken in. They were a fort under siege. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every snap of a twig made them both jump. A few days later, Will hitched the wagon. "I'm going for supplies," he said, "to the next town over. I'll be gone 2 days." Lucy's blood ran cold. "You can't leave us here alone." "They won't make a move in broad daylight," he said, but his eyes were grim. "And I'll be back before they know I'm gone. Bar the door. Keep the rifle close." He was wrong. They waited until he was gone. They waited until the sun was high in the sky. Then they came. It wasn't just Eli and his mother this time. It was a half-dozen men from the town. Men whose faces she recognized from the square. They didn't ride up to the cabin. They circled it, their horses moving slowly, deliberately, tightening a noose. Sophia and Ben were inside, their faces pale with fear. "What do they want, Mama?" Sophia whispered. "They want to scare us," Lucy said, her voice more confident than she felt. She grabbed the heavy rifle from its pegs. It was heavy, unfamiliar in her hands. "You don't know how to use that," Sophia said, her own voice trembling. "I'll learn fast," Lucy replied. The first rock shattered the window. The children screamed. Lucy shoved them under the table. "Stay down," she commanded. Another rock hit the door, then another. "Come on out, Lucy," Eli's voice called, full of a drunken, mocking confidence. "We just want to talk." Lucy peered through the broken window. They were dismounted now, moving closer, fanning out. This wasn't about talking. This was an attack. She rested the rifle on the windowsill, just as Will had taught her. She took a deep breath, aimed at the space just above Eli's head, and fired. The blast was deafening. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but the shot was true. The bullet splintered the porch roof, sending a shower of wood chips down on Eli's head. He yelped and scrambled back. The men hesitated, surprised. They hadn't expected her to fight back. That hesitation was all she needed. "Sophia," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The back shed. Your father keeps his tools there. There's a small window. Can you fit through it?" Sophia nodded, her eyes wide. "Run," Lucy said. "Run to the neighbors. Get help." "I can't leave you." "You have to," Lucy said, reloading the rifle with fumbling fingers. "Go! Now!" Sophia grabbed Ben's hand, and they scrambled toward the back of the cabin. Lucy fired again, this time at the ground near the men's feet. They scattered, cursing. She bought her children time, but she knew it wouldn't last. They would get bolder, they would break down the door, and she would be alone. She looked around the small cabin, this place she had come to as a prisoner, this place that had become her home. She thought of Will, of his quiet strength, of his calloused hands. She would not let them take this from him. She braced the rifle against her shoulder, took aim at the center of the approaching group, and prepared to make her last stand. The front door splintered under the force of a heavy boot. Lucy fired, One of the men screamed and clutched his shoulder, stumbling back. But there were too many of them. They poured into the cabin, their faces ugly with greed and hate. Eli was at the front, his eyes wild. "You're gonna pay for that, Lucy," he snarled. She tried to reload, but they were on her, grabbing the rifle, twisting her arms behind her back. She fought. She kicked and bit and screamed, but she was no match for them. They dragged her out into the harsh sunlight of the yard. "Where are the kids?" Eli demanded, his face inches from hers. Lucy spat in his face. He slapped her, hard. Her head snapped back, the world exploding in a flash of white pain. "Tie her up," he ordered. They threw her to the ground and bound her hands and feet. "Now," Eli said, turning to his men, "we find what we came for." They tore the cabin apart. They ripped open sacks of flour, overturned the furniture, smashed the jars of preserves she had so carefully put up. They found nothing. "It's not here," one of the men yelled. Eli stormed back out and loomed over her. "Where is it, Lucy? Where did he hide it?" "Hide what?" she gasped, her ribs screaming in protest. "Don't play dumb with me," he sneered. "The deed, the original survey map, the one that proves that silver vein runs right under this worthless piece of dirt." The truth hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about revenge. It was about money. Greed. Will's land wasn't just a poor homestead. It was a silver mine. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. Eli laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "Oh, I think you do. And if you don't tell me, maybe the boy will." He nodded to two of his men, who started walking toward the woods where Sophia and Ben had fled. "No!" Lucy screamed. "Leave them alone! Then tell me where it is. I don't know," she sobbed. "I swear, I don't know." And then, a new sound. The thunder of hoofbeats coming fast. It was Will. He came over the rise like a storm, his face a mask of pure fury, a rifle in his hands. The men in the yard froze, caught completely by surprise. Will didn't hesitate. He fired from the saddle. One of Eli's men went down, then another. The rest scattered, running for their horses. Eli, in a panic, grabbed Lucy, pulling her up and holding a knife to her throat. "Drop the gun, Elk!" he screamed. "Or she dies!" Will reined his horse to a stop, his rifle still aimed. His eyes were cold, deadly. "Let her go, Cobb." "Not until you give me the map," Eli shrieked, his voice cracking. "There is no map," Will said, his voice flat. "Liar!" "The silver vein is a myth," Will said. "A story my grandfather told to keep people off this land. There's nothing here but rock and dirt." Eli stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. Then his eyes flickered to the terror in Lucy's face, and he knew. He had been chasing a ghost. His empire was built on a lie. He let out a wild, animal roar of frustration and rage. He tightened his grip on the knife, and then an arrow sprouted from his chest. He looked down at it, a look of stunned surprise on his face. He staggered back, released Lucy, and fell to the ground. Lucy scrambled away, her heart pounding. She looked up at the ridge. Standing there, silhouetted against the sky, were a dozen Apache warriors, their bows drawn. Sophia and Ben were with them. The little girl had not run to the neighbors. She had run to her family. Will dismounted and came to Lucy, cutting her bonds. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "It's over," he whispered. The Apache warriors came down from the ridge, their faces grim. One of them, an old man with eyes as ancient as the mountains, looked at Will, then at Lucy. He spoke in his own language, his voice a low rumble. Will translated, his own voice thick with emotion. He says, "You have the heart of a warrior. You protected his grandchildren. You are one of us now." The old man looked at their clasped hands. He spoke again. "He says a home is not built of wood and mud," Will whispered. "It is built of courage." The men from the town were rounded up. The truth of Eli's greed and cruelty came out. The town, shamed and humbled, finally saw Lucy not as a burden, but as a hero. A few weeks later, as the sun set over the valley, Will and Lucy stood on the porch of their repaired cabin. Sophia and Ben were chasing fireflies in the yard, their laughter echoing in the quiet air. Will took her hand. "The silver may be a myth," he said, his voice soft, "but I found my treasure here anyway." He pulled her close, and his kiss was a promise of a future built not on lies or greed, but on the simple, unshakable truth of their love. They had been brought together by debt and disgrace. They had been tested by fire and fear. But they had forged a family, not of blood, but of fierce, unwavering loyalty. And in the heart of the unforgiving desert, they had built a home that was stronger than any stone. What do you think makes a family? Is it the blood you share, or the battles you fight together? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by Lucy and Will's story, please hit that subscribe button. We have more tales of courage and unexpected love from the Old West coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for watching.